Can you hear me? Okay. Take a moment to just imagine a world without boundaries. It's rather difficult to picture, isn't it? Boundaries are a constant presence in every aspect of our lives. There are tectonic plate boundaries, national boundaries, moral boundaries, cultural boundaries, personal boundaries. Written and unwritten rules are a form of boundary. Each of these boundaries serves as the dividing line between two different things. On one side, good. On the other, bad. Right and wrong. One country and another. Seems straightforward, right? The boundary is the tipping point, the sharp distinction between black and white. Only what if, in reality, that black and white is more like a vast expanse of gray? We all know there is rarely a simple, clear distinction between good and bad, or right and wrong, and the boundaries that divide one country from another are hardly straightforward. Around the world, numerous international borders are in dispute due to political conflicts, but these aren't even close to the most complicated. There are also enclaves, countries that are entirely located within other countries. In fact, the border between India and Bangladesh looks more like the cross-section of a sponge than an international border. That region has a third-order enclave, a country within a country within a country within a country. So boundaries are hardly straightforward. Why then do we, more often than not, act like boundaries are straightforward, like they're black and white or set in stone? Well, the simple answer is that boundaries minimize uncertainty and limit change. And as humans, we are biologically wired to be change-averse. Dr. David Rock, founder of the Neuroleadership Institute, discovered that uncertainty registers in the brain as a tension, a gap, or an error, triggering an immediate alert or threat response in our limbic system. Since change is literally perceived as a threat, it is something that must be dealt with before we can begin to feel comfortable again. And the simplest way to feel comfortable? To set boundaries and avoid that change in the first place. Now, this change aversion certainly made sense evolutionarily. If our hunter and gatherer ancestors wanted to avoid consuming something poisonous, they would simply seek to eat something known, something certain. But in our modern world, many boundaries are arbitrary, antiquated, or artificially created, and yet we allow them to persist as hard and fast rules in our society. Our error is in disregarding the fact that boundaries are not that simple, and they're certainly not that straightforward. Now, this is not to say that breaking through boundaries is simple or even straightforward. The thought of breaching even a simple boundary like the language barrier is terrifying to most of us. I tied my stomach in knots the first time I went to meet my cousins in Germany, wondering if we would get along. I didn't speak German and they didn't speak English. How are we going to communicate, to connect? As it turns out, I needn't have worried. When I met my cousins, I was immediately dragged into gymnastics contests, dancing, and ultra-competitive games of Old Maid. My cousins and I didn't allow a simple boundary to stop us from having fun or getting to know one another, and my life is all the richer for it. So when governments, individuals, businesses, or communities decide to allow pre-established boundaries to divide people or limit them, they aren't enriching lives. They are endorsing the status quo over progress. Those who poke a hole in established boundaries, those who break barriers, they are the people whom history remembers. The Aristotles, the George Washingtons, the Rosa Parks. There's a reason that Stanford professor Laurel Thatcher Ulrich once said that well-behaved women rarely make history. Even if our goal is not ultimately to be remembered in history books, it is nonetheless counterproductive to focus on boundaries. They push us into complacency, push back against our constant struggle to create a better future. This is why we need to imagine a world without rigid, inflexible boundaries. A world in which we can see past the limits others have set for us, where we can see past the limits we have set for ourselves, is a world in which we are all capable of greatness. Of course, doing away with all boundaries is not the solution. Some boundaries are in place to keep us healthy. Others are in place to keep us safe. But we need to stop placing so much emphasis on boundaries, the things that divide us, the things that limit us. Instead, we should be focusing on connections, the things that unite us and drive us to push past our limits. Just imagine what we could achieve in a world where we define our boundaries instead of letting our boundaries define us. Just imagine a better world, not one without boundaries, but one with connections. A world in which the only limits to what we can achieve is that which we imagine to be possible. Thank you.